Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War news update for the, goodness me, 5th of September 2023. Let's go to where we normally start, which is the hits and losses segment and the Ukrainian general staff figures for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description below, at the bottom of the description. Right, let's go and see what the figures are according to the Ukrainians. 560 personnel lost, Russian personnel that is. That's a fairly good day for the Ukrainians. Now, if we look at the front line, things are picking up in places like Velika Novosilka or just around there, around Novodonetsk. I'll show you that later in my next video. But I think they are picking up offensive activities there. Obviously, Robotina is pretty hot at the moment, and then quite a lot of activity in Bakhmut and things going on up in the northeast as well. So 560 is kind of where we've seen it, but not at the bottom end of the range. So 9 tanks and 7 APVs is another consistent day of losses. Not the biggest losses we've seen, but if you're going to lose 9 tanks a day, things aren't looking good for you. It's not to say the Ukrainians aren't losing as well. And I'm going to have a bit of a, I guess, could it be seen as a corrective? At least, you know, we'll have a look at ideas that the Ukrainians are losing substantial troops themselves too. 38 artillery systems is a phenomenal number. The last week in terms of artillery has been absolutely terrible for the Russians. They have lost just dozens of pieces of kit of artillery every single day. 38 again yesterday is just completely unsustainable. But when will that really serious tipping point be reached? Have we reached that tipping point? Are the Ukrainians able to do far more offensive activities due to the fact that the Russians have been seriously attrited in this category? 6 multiple launch rocket systems is a huge day in that category as well. If you look at the totals, they've lost 747. We're on day 550 something. So that is just over 1 a day on average, one and a half maybe towards there. So to lose, well, 1.25. So to lose 6 in one day is not great for the Russians at all. That is a really significant loss. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and we'll have a look at some of the visual confirmed accumulators to see what that might be. 31 drones. It's not from last night. That's the night before, the wave that particularly targeted the grain export infrastructure in the port of Reni and around the Danube River. 26 vehicles and fuel tanks is another heavy day of attrition of the Russian logistics capability, and 4 pieces of special equipment can be a whole variety of stuff. So this is another bad day for the Russians. That is just incredible that the Ukrainians are able to attrit this just continually. Now the question is, therefore, how accurate are these figures? And we go to some lengths here to try and discuss whether these are realistic figures or not. And I think they are on the side of being accurate. Certainly a damn sight more realistic than the Russian figures that are put out by the Russian MOD. But there still might be an element of, but you know, even if these figures are 60% correct, the Russians are losing just crazy. Like even if 40% is over-egged, or even half is over-egged, which is like is not going to be that. These are still really bad figures. To lose 19 artillery, if we just cut that in half, 19 pieces of artillery in a day is bad, right? So you know, these figures are not good for the Russians, right? In terms of what's been visually confirmed yesterday, Oryx, the Dutch concern that does this aggregation, has noted 20 pieces of Russian equipment, but it's where the ratios have been really in favor of Ukraine over the last few days. Actually, yesterday we saw something near parity there. So 20 Russian pieces of kit lost. Most of that seems to be infantry fighting vehicles, T-90 tank, a couple of T-72s, K-52 attack helicopter thrown in there, and only 1 piece of artillery there. So that's interesting. And then the Ukrainian figures, 18 lost. What do we have that might be of of interest here. Just again, quite a few IFVs and APCs and whatnot. Actually, more tanks for the Ukrainians here. We've got 6 tanks lost as opposed to the Russians 3, I think it was. So that probably shows you that the Ukrainians are pushing forward and are trying to use their armor to punch some holes in various places, rather than sitting back either in a refitting phase or sitting back and letting their distance ordnance do the job. Right, if we go to Andrew Perpetua, the mapper, I depend largely on, he adds up all the figures he sees in his kind of trawling of the socials and whatnot. And this is in favor of the Ukrainians, about a 2-to-1 ratio here. What do we have? We have artillery, boats, civilian vehicles and trucks, infantry fighting vehicles, tanks. That's a pretty standard spread across the board there. And then for the Ukrainian losses, again, pretty much spread across the board. There's a Leopard 2A4 thrown in there. Don't know when that was from, whether that is recently or a bit of footage coming out from previously, but that's not, the Ukrainians aren't going to like that. Anyway, so yeah, pretty, I suppose, bad day for both sides, as in they're losing a lot of equipment, both sides. But it's according to Andrew Perpetua, is in favour of the Ukrainians. According to Oryx, is pretty much parity. Ka-52 attack helicopter was lost in the Sea of Azov. This actually happened on September 1st in the waters on the Sea of Azov, approximately 1.5 kilometers from the coastline. Both crew members were able to escape and were rescued, but that is a loss of another. Now, I think there's visual confirmation now, probably, that 43 have been lost out of 114 or so. So if you're thinking that's visual confirmation, then they've lost a good half of their Ka-52 attack helicopter fleet and an amount of crew as well. That is pretty devastating for the Russians. And even when they have a fleet of, say, 114, as we all know from looking at the inventories of Allied forces, you know damn well not all of those are going to be flight worthy. When you look at the Challenger fleet, you know how many of those are used as spare parts. These are newer frames, right? These are newer pieces of kit than, say, the Challenger 2, but you get the point. It's not to say that their entire fleet is going to be able to be flown in the air straight away. Ukraine's main director of intelligence reports that the Mi-8 helicopter, which was landed by a Russian pilot, will soon begin combat duty for the benefit of Ukraine. Now, there was a Ukrainian documentary that came out 2 nights ago now, was it? Concerning this story. So the story was, as I reported to you, it was varying stories at the time because the Russians produced a counter-narrative. Their counter-narrative was that a Russian helicopter got lost, electronic warfare messed around with its navigation, it landed in Ukraine and was captured. But it landed so far behind the lines in Ukraine, something like 300 kilometers, that actually that story didn't really add up. You'd have to be a really bad helicopter pilot if that happened. So the story, and the pilot has been interviewed, right? So this is, as according to the Russian pilot and as according to the Ukrainians, he basically had agreed to, and this was a helicopter with a bunch of spare parts for Su-24s or something, so quite important cargo on board. He decided, and I think he previously organised to, he didn't want to be part of the war, why are we killing each other type thing. He then arranged to do this, and I think the Ukrainians got his family into Ukraine. And then he flew to a Ukrainian airbase, but his crew weren't on board with this. So when he landed, the rest of the crew kicked off, and they were taken out by the Ukrainian special forces. Or the Ukrainian troops or whatever. So the crew were killed, but he survived, as was the intention, and the helicopter's now in Ukrainian on the Ukrainian inventory. So it's quite an incredible story and a really high value, big PR loss as well. High value gain for the Ukrainians. Okay, so there's that story, and that was on TV. Okay. Moving on to keeping into the air, but this is with drones. So UJ-22, quite a substantial drone. You can see it's basically like a small aeroplane. Multi-purpose unmanned aircraft system was destroyed by Russian Mi-28, which hit it most likely with a chin-mounted Shipunov 2A42 30mm autocannon. So that's one mounted on like the chin of the helicopter, if you right the front of the helicopter. This is the second confirmed loss of this type of drone. There is a lot of larger drone activity, particularly in the area of the north of the Black Sea to the west of Crimea, going on towards Kherson Oblast, where the Ukrainians are using quite a few Bayraktar drones and other larger drones to help with their activities around there and hitting quite a few targets and whatnot. Now, this is, I'm not going to show you this. I'll show you the beginning of this just because, I don't know, it gives you an idea of what drone operators are doing. I presume this is a Ukrainian drone acting on a Russian vehicle, right? What you see is these people know, they've got out the car and they know there's a drone, right? And this talks about the psychology of these drones. Talked about this quite a bit over the last week or so. Like, every time you get in a car, you must just think, what's the chance of me being hit by a drone or followed by a drone? And then that plays with your psychology. And then someone who's had military experience talked about this on that thread as well, in the YouTube comments, and appreciate it when people bring their personal experience, saying that actually, and this was before drones were as widespread as they are now, he said, you're absolutely right, it absolutely messes with your head. Here, these guys get out to run away from the drone, but the drone follows them each side, and they run from one side of the vehicle and then to the other, and then they run away because the drone is just circling them. And look at that. And then they run away, and basically the drone goes, and they run to about here, and the drone doesn't go for the vehicle, it goes for them, and just basically explodes right in the middle of them, and that's the end of them. And just how terrifying must that be? As the source here says, this is scary. You get out, you think, right, they've got us, they're going to blow up the 4x4. You run one side, it follows you. You run the other side, it follows you. You just try and run away, and it kills. I mean, their best chance is to run in separate directions, right? But it just talks to how skilled the drone operators now are, how capable the drones are of moving and hitting particular targets. We've seen drones go through windows. We've seen drones have really precise strike capabilities. Right. Before we talk about the challenges the Ukrainians are having, here are the challenges, and this is a massive thread. I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to save this for an extra. But this is a Leningrad regiment of mobilized soldiers from the St. Petersburg area, I think, predominantly. And half of them have been killed, apparently. And they talk about just how little ammunition they were given. The kit they were given was terrible. It did say that they had 2 months of training, though, which is a hell of a lot more than I've seen that others have. But they were given, when they were then sent to the front line, they were given like some ammunition at the beginning, and then 3 months ago they given some more ammunition. So basically, the entire time in between, they had to use trophy ammunition that they captured off the Ukrainians. He said they'd given like old guns, and then this Maxim gun that didn't even have a firing pin from 1943. And they had to get a firing pin from somewhere. Someone knew someone in the middle of Russia and got a firing pin and was able to work. They had one short wheelbase Ural truck for 550 men. It was just all absolutely shocking. And then half of them are now dead. And their food, they did a video complaining, and they were then sent in to support another regiment who'd done a video of their own to complain. Here, this one of the ones I've shown you previously, it's just all absolutely shocking. It said for food rations, they get like 1.5 boiled potatoes each. And just, yeah, it's a really terrible account, or an account of how terrible these guys' experiences have been, and how they were taken out as well, how they were, how it looked on the battlefront too. So a really interesting thread that I'll go through the whole of that thread later today, hopefully. But so I keep telling you about this, how terrible it is for the Russians, and it is terrible for the Russians, right? They have all sorts of challenges. They also have good troops who do good stuff too. It's not to say that they are all in this terrible situation, but even when you have low morale troops and you give them a gun and the Ukrainians are attacking, those low morale troops with poor training are sat in a trench, are still going to cause an issue for the attacking Ukrainians, right? So it's not to say that these guys have absolutely no utility. They're still fighting the war. They're just not very happy about it, and it's way worse than it should be, right? But on the other side of the coin, the Ukrainians are taking heavy losses too. So Defmon says this is a much needed wake up call. This is a pro-Ukrainian on the ground, fighter talking. I assume he's a sniper, but it may not be. So currently, I and other channels are covering events on various fronts, but we try not to talk about the losses so as not to give reason for Russians to rejoice. And it turns out that our people forget about reality. And I'm as guilty as anyone here, right? So losses are simply too big, and not from contact battles, but from artillery and loitering munitions. So that is to say that actually the running at the trenches isn't so much the stuff that's attriting them. It's still a case of artillery and loitering munitions. Now, I think there are issues. So he's talking about the Crimea area, Serebryansky Forest up there, where we know it is particularly tough, and up in the Kupiansk to Liman sort of area, there has been, the Ukrainians have found it difficult to defend there. In particular, yesterday there were very heavy battles with losses in Klishchivka and Andriivka directions, so that would be south of Bakhmut. Our brigades have been standing here for almost a year without rotations. Something we say about the Russians a lot. The guys are exhausted. There are not enough artillery and drones. All our achievements are based on ideological guys who, despite the difficult situation, F those bar stewards, do not go to record snotty videos with appeals and people donating. Right. This goes against some of what the Russians are saying, which is that actually, and also remember that's what I was trying to say about the Russian complaints just there. It doesn't necessarily mean that is representative of the entire front line. There will be elements of the front line where each side has issues, but like 10 kilometers down a road, it might not be the same for whichever side we're talking about. So you might not be able to extrapolate this across the whole front line, right? However, the point is that the Ukrainians still are losing a lot of troops, right? Crimea, everything is fine in the media. Azov is at war. We are destroying the under fire, but no one asks a question, at what cost? For those who have relatives there, they know about the Pizdares. Their artilleries do not spare anyone. In Russia, with her, unfortunately, everything is fine. Bit of translation. The idea is that we seem to think everything's going well in Crimea, and we are defending well or attacking well or whatever, but actually at what cost? So yeah, we might the headline figures might be pretty good, on the map it might look good, but actually at what cost does that come? Therefore, I ask you adequately assess your situation. The Podors are pressing around the clock, so that's a kind of expletive for the Russians, are pressing around the clock. There is no shortage of them, neither in equipment nor in drones nor in people. There you go. So that is a bit of a corrective. That then Tatarigami says below that to Defmon, says, I'm about to voice an unpopular opinion, but it's a harsh reality. Unfortunately, our losses are substantial, and we're a smaller country in terms of population. Ignoring this fact now may lead to a rude awakening later. The most effective approach is to secure more assistance for Ukraine, as Western equipment has already saved numerous Ukrainian lives. So someone says to him, don't think Ukraine can do any other way, otherwise they just risk being overwhelmed by sheer number advantage Russia has, especially with annexed parts in mind. To which Tatarigami says, when I emphasize the need to secure more help, I'm primarily addressing our supporters and those who care about us abroad. Assistance from your countries isn't solely within our control. Please continue to uphold public support for Ukraine. And this is what it's all about from him, which is like, we've got the people, but at the moment we are defending and attacking, well, but at a huge cost to our people. And that resource is not infinite. And that resource is something that Russia has far more of. We really, really need to drive home the asymmetrical advantage in other areas because we can't do it in terms of people. So therefore, it is incumbent upon, if the rest of the world want Ukraine to win this war, then it's like we say, or many of us say this on a daily basis, they just need everything. Why bother umming and ahhing about Taurus? Why bother umming and ahhing about ATACMS? Why bother, just get them bloody everything and give them the best opportunity to prevail in this war, because otherwise the cost is too high. And then this might reflect some of the issues here. So a draft law has been registered in the Verkhovna Rada, so the Ukrainian parliament, which provides for the cancellation of the postponement of mobilization for male students from the age of 30. So, as far as I understand this, male students from the age of 30 were going to be mobilized, then they postponed that, and now they've cancelled the postponement. So they can be mobilized. This is stated in corresponding card of the draft law number 9672. The cancellation and deferral also applies to those who do not increase their level but only receive another education. Which is to say, people that are trying to use, I guess, education to avoid mobilization, that loophole might be closed. So, man, these things are tough, right? Because people want Ukraine. If you're Ukrainian, you want Ukraine to prevail. It's the same with some of these Russian people who are escaping Russia and going to other countries. It's not they're against the war. And the same with the Ukrainians. It's not like they're against Ukraine prevailing. Of course, they want Ukraine to prevail. But when it comes to it, would you sacrifice your life to do that? And actually, there are some people who are vehemently pro-Ukraine, Ukrainians I'm talking about, who are like, but still, I'm happy with my life and I don't want to do that. So there are these challenges for getting Ukrainians to go and fight on the front line. And therefore, some kind of forced mobilization or something like that is on the card. So Oleg Kontenko, Commissioner for Missing Persons under Special Circumstances, said that Ukraine will receive 10 refrigerators, containers and refrigerated trucks from Germany to store the bodies of fallen servicemen. So I've reported this before with regard to Russians, to say, look, this is a reflection of a loss of Russian personnel. It's incumbent upon me to say to communicate this when it happens for the Ukrainians, of course. So I think you put this together, and the Ukrainians are, of course, they're losing troops. I don't think at all they're losing them at the rate the Russians are, and I've long said this, and I hopefully give you enough information that defends that conclusion. But we go back to, well, Russia just has loads more people, so Ukraine can lose far fewer people than the Russians, but that still be a massive issue for the Ukrainians. And this is, I think, where we're at. So the Russians are losing more, and they have poorly trained troops more generally, and they have, in general, struggle with equipment. But there are elements of equipment they have an advantage. So electronic warfare seems to be a fairly good category for them. But even given all those things, they just have that, quantity has its own quality. And that challenge for the Ukrainians is pretty obvious. Right. Moving on, I didn't know where to put this. In fact, I'll put this in my frontline piece. But Russian Volunteer Corps took responsibility for the sabotage in Bryansk region. So they have been doing activity over the border still, and announced that 2 FSB border service officers were killed during a raid. The Russians reported that they destroyed the neo-Nazis commando. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it appears that the Russian Volunteer Corps claim about the 2 border guards being killed, the FSB border agents being killed, was true, as there appears to be kind of obituaries for them and memorials. So anyway, they are continuing to work on across the border. Now, I released this yesterday, and there's quite a bit of pushback from here. Right, first thing I have to say, yesterday, I don't know what it was. I don't know if most of the team noticed this yesterday, but goodness me, the trolls were out in force. I mean, the Russian trolls, I think, was the heaviest day of people. I know Trevor and Clive and all the usual suspects and Nikos G and blah, blah, blah. All the people who we know are trolls. Yeah, you're there. Okay. But there were loads of randoms there yesterday. A lot of activity. And a lot of people saying things that, like, you weren't 100% sure whether they're trolls, but then they're like, questioning things, but then putting the old Slava Ukraine at the end. So you're like, I'm not sure. Anyway, a lot of people were claiming that this video footage of supposedly of Russian people surrendering was actually Ukrainians surrendering, and that no reports took the video down, and therefore these are definitely Ukrainians. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's not Ukraine. So I've done a bit of searching, and actually quite a few people have been saying loads of Russians are making this claim. So beware of argument from assertion. So if someone says this is what this is, and that's a mere assertion. However, this is what I said. These are Ukrainians, these are Russian troops surrendering in Klishchiivka, and that was a mere assertion. So I need to be able to back that up myself. But I would find it really bizarre that a large number of Ukrainians would go a long way to surrender when Ukraine is their own country, and they would, everyone knows how terribly the Ukrainian POWs are treated. That you would walk a long way to surrender en masse to Russia, who have invaded, when there's absolutely no kind of strategic need for you to do that. You know, Russia aren't going to win, like they're not going to take the country in anytime soon. So, just it makes no sense that this would be Russian that this would be Ukrainian POWs or Ukrainian soldiers surrendering. I think it might have been taken down because actually it could be a slightly older footage. That's what some people are saying, that actually it might not be from Klishchiivka like the last few days. This could be, I don't know, months ago, last year, something like that. But it's difficult when there are so many bits of footage that are thrown out and you kind of go along with that and post it as well and talk about it without. It's difficult to check everything, right? Otherwise, I'll be spending all my days doing my skeptical analysis, which is good. In a perfect world, I'd do that, and I wouldn't post anything without like triple checking it. But I only have so much time in a day. So you're thinking, right? These reputable sources are posting this, so I'm going to post this. But yeah, it's then challenged by a lot of trolls, and I don't think those trolls are correct. And I think it was just too concerted an effort by a lot of trolls on a lot of threads. And you saw it where this video was posted in a number of places. A lot of these sort of Russian voices saying that. So I just think that's trollish behavior. This has happened. It might not have happened in the last week, is my caveat, and that's what I still believe is a conclusion. Anyway. Moving on, Russia. So warehouses on fire in a Leningradsky train station in Moscow. Again, not for the first time. This is a train station in Moscow. Imagine this being in London. Imagine this being one of the train stations in London on fire in this way. And it's the second time it's happened. And I don't know. The Russia on fire stuff, the reason I post this is because I'm fascinated by it. And it's just this gift that keeps on giving in terms of it's consistent fires, and it's representative of surely things aren't well back in the state of Russia. Okay, moving on to strikes here, and there's not a lot to report. It's a fairly quiet night, actually, for a change. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said that Ukraine has photographic evidence that Shahed drones fell on the territory of Romania. I reported this yesterday. Some people saying, actually, there's no evidence of this. But, lots of people were reporting this, and it seemed to be fairly bona fide claim. I said at the time that actually, just because it fell on Romanian territory doesn't mean it was flying over Romanian territory, or that it was even necessarily aiming at a target, super close to the border, but it might have been shot down near the border, and the trajectory of its flight path meant that it fell over the border, right? But whatever, I was like, still, this is going to be interesting to see what the reaction is. And he said, I think that in this particular case, the Romanian authorities are now studying all aspects of what happened. It's pointless to deny that something fell there. We authoritatively claim with evidence that it was a Shahed drone that flew there. We have photographic evidence that something fell there. Okay, so what has happened about that? Well, it appears that, and I've got this in the geopolitical segment, so we'll return to this, but it appears that I think the Romanians are going to kind of let it fly, or not fly, as the case may be. I think it's probably too risky for them to see this as an escalation, but this does put pressure on the Russians themselves. Okay, on to other strikes. Oleshki in Kherson, explosions yesterday. There would no doubt be the usual explosions going on around the place, but I've been commenting recently how Storm Shadows seem to be a bit thin on the ground in terms of being used at the moment. We know that they've been given scalps and Storm Shadows, but there's only a limited supply of those, and they may have exhausted them already. They were given 50 scalps by France, and how long do 50 scalps last? And the other question is, how many airframes do they have to fly these? So when you talk about Taurus have only got 600. There are only 600 of them made. so just to remind you, yesterday I said Germany might not give them because they don't fit any of the airframes that the Ukrainians use, although they can adapt them. There's only 600 of them, and by the way, 600 isn't a lot. So the entire inventory of Taurus missiles for the German Air Force is the annual production for the US of their similar cruise missile. Right, so the US produce 600 of their ones a year, right? And Germany have 600 in total, and that's all they have, and that's all they're going to have. So there's a huge disparity in between nations in what they have. Now, the problem, and Perun's latest video is so worth listening to, as ever, every Saturday I'm there. But one thing to bear in mind is that the Su-24 are the only aircraft that can fire these. And they don't have a lot of them, and we might not be seeing a lot of these being fired because actually their fleet might have been taken out. So let's listen to Perun about this.
Add to that the fact that the production line closed in the 90s, meaning the youngest Fencer airframes in existence are at the very least millennials, and you can probably understand why it might be a pain for Ukraine to keep something like this flying. So much so that at the beginning of the war, Ukraine's reported to only have had approximately 23 of these aircraft in active service, including both the attack bomber and reconnaissance versions. Since February 2022, 17 of those have been visually confirmed destroyed.
So the visual confirmation of destroyed Su-24s include, and this includes the bombers and the reconnaissance. So the reconnaissance you would assume can't do the bombing raids. Don't know how easy it is to adapt that airframe, but they've only got 6 of them left, right? That's confirmed losses. Do they have any of them left, is my question.
Others may have been reactivated from airframes Ukraine had in deep storage. Ukraine had quite a number of these, and some have even been attacked by the Russians. But at the same time, you have to imagine there's been significant wear and tear operating an airframe like this one under wartime conditions. If Ukraine wants
and the Su-24 has a high maintenance demand
more, well, that's too bad because there aren't really any real sources of potential replacements out there. The aircraft is mostly flown by nations like Russia, Belarus and Syria, which aren't exactly going to donate their examples, and NATO countries have a grand total of 0. And yet, this decades-old maintenance hog is absolutely vital to the current Ukrainian war effort, because so far, it is the only aircraft in the Ukrainian inventory known to be capable of carrying and firing the Storm Shadow and Scalp air-launched cruise missiles. Without that handful of remaining operational airframes, Ukraine currently has no way to launch those devastating long-range strikes that have targeted Russian logistics, command posts and bridges. The Russians obviously know this and have hunted the aircraft relentlessly. In a sense, the Ukrainian fencers have become a sort of white rhino of the Ukrainian Air Force, the last few remaining examples of an endangered species, ruthlessly hunted by Russian missile strikes against their air bases, all in an apparent attempt to render these ancient airframes extinct. For now, the last remaining fencers keep flying. We know that because the Storm Shadows and Scalps do. But if eventually the Russians get their way, and either enemy action or simple wear and tear takes these airframes out of service, then Ukraine is going to desperately need something else, anything else, that can fill that vital role of carrying and launching Western cruise missiles.
I'll leave it there. Absolutely on point, and the idea that the Russians have been hunting these is, absolutely the case. We know that the air base up near Khmelnytsky has been, which was one of the main air bases where these were flying from, has been targeted a number of times. So yes, they move them around to try and stop that from happening, but yeah, they don't have many of these, and this is why it is absolutely vital that they get other airframes into the Air Force as soon as possible. And some people are saying that, look, to fire some of these cruise missiles is so bloody important that actually you don't need to train up F-16 fighter pilots to, say, fire the American equivalent, the JASSM or whatever, if I remember correctly. So you don't need to train them up to be the best F-16 pilots to be able to engage in dogfights or anything. Just they need to be able to get the F-16 up in the air, get some way back from the front line, fire off some cruise missiles, and then land. That's all. That's all. You know, so there is potentially, you know, you could see the need for just getting some F-16s up in the air, getting to Ukraine and up in the air, because how much longer have we even reached this point where the Su-24s can't fly anymore? There are no more Su-24s, and therefore there are no more Storm Shadows and Scalp, and this could be why they're not giving the Taurus, because Taurus doesn't fit on F-16 anyway, and there's only 600, and it could be that they're running low on Su-24s. So, right. Moving on to other bits and pieces, a brave girl today wrapped herself in the flag of Ukraine on Red Square. So this is yesterday in Moscow. It didn't take long for Elena Kozevnikova to be arrested. This is how it is when you live in a fascist state. You're arrested without breaking a law, just because they don't permit anything. So, you know, to all the Russian trolls on the threads, is this what liberty looks like in Russia? Ukrainian economy is recovering faster than the NBU expected. Inflation in Ukraine slowed sharply from 26% in January to almost 11% in July. In particular, inflation is forecast to decrease to 8.5% in 2024 and 6% in 2025. So that's possibly something of a pleasant surprise there. Good news for the Ukrainians. Russian propagandist Simonyan complains that no Russian allies give Russia any weapons, send soldiers to help or help in any other way. She remembers that Russia lost the only war it fought on its own, so the Crimean War. Simonyan also repeats one of the most popular Russian myths, that it was the USSR that won World War II. This belief is one of the pillars Russia builds its identity on. Worth going through what she says there. I might save that for an extra, but this is, again, propagandists bemoaning that no one helps Russia. Well, what does that say? What does that say? No one's helping you because you're the bad guys. So, yeah, maybe don't invade other countries. But this is true, and this is what gives Ukraine so much hope, is that there are other countries helping, and there aren't the countries helping Russia. Yes, China are doing it under the radar, and then you've got, and we'll talk about this in the next video, then you've got North Korea helping, and obviously Iran. But, you know, if you're best mates with China, North Korea and Iran, then, as Mitchell and Webb, the comedians, said, you know, are we the bad guys? You know, as they're dressed in SS Nazi paraphernalia with skulls on their hats. They're like, you ever thought that we're the bad guys? Yeah, that's what you need to be doing there. Anyway, finally, for this video, Surovikin, famous for his line of trenches, he is alive and apparently well. He's supposedly, you know, resting, or I don't know. Anyway, that is Surovikin being seen not in military gear and not, you know, giving commands and orders such that lots of people die unnecessarily, just walking around in his sunnies and a pair of jeans. So there you go. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I will get on with putting together the next video. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.